never been to Malaysia. So this will be my first visit there. And I'm excited to meet the people and the bees and the flowers there, the plant world too. And I had a little bit of experience with bees and with flowers in Saigon in Vietnam, and in the kind of north and south of that country. About 13 years ago, I was there for a research project and to study. So excited to be at that part of the world again and to visit Malaysia. And yeah, it sounds like a very diverse group of friends from many different countries are with us today, and also maybe with us, hopefully with us also in June. And I'm speaking from these principles and through my own experience with biodynamic beekeeping and biodynamic agriculture, which were both founded by Rudolf Steiner exactly 100 years ago. And these methods and the approach to this beekeeping is based in Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy. And that worldview and the approach that arises from anthroposophy is truly a path of inquiry. It's a path of deepening our understanding of ourselves, of developing ourselves and our questions, developing our senses, our perception. How do we stand in the face of the honeybee? How do we meet this creature? And how do we come to find inspirations? How do we come to find imaginations? How do we come to enliven our thinking that we can develop a truer and more exact picture of who this being is inside of us, that we might come to an understanding of this creature and then develop our practices of how to support the life and the processes and the development and the whole life cycle of this creature based on a deeper understanding of what we might call the instinct of this creature, but also the wisdom of this creature. Anthroposophy is the wisdom of the human being, and in a picture of anthroposophy, we have the human being as what we might call a small world or a microcosm. And then when we look out into the world of nature, extending all the way to the stars and the sun and the planets and so on, but right down to the soil and to our earth, we have this big picture of the macrocosm, the great world around us. And the work of Rudolf Steiner, especially when he gives these lectures about bees in the year 1923, he is a genius, you could say, in making this connection between what lives in the honeybee, and what is the analog, what is the picture of that process as it lives inside us as human beings. And in coming to understand the honeybee, we actually come to understand better ourselves. And as we develop our understanding of ourselves, we make ourselves more capable of really understanding the honeybee. So this is sort of an approach that, while I'm here, grounded on a piece of land, on a different continent, halfway around the world, I'm it's the morning here, And so the sun is just rising here and it's setting for you. You know, we have direct experiences with how that approach and that path of inquiry, sort of that spiritual wisdom, comes down to earth and lands on the ground right here in Virginia. But I am confident that you all have the experience of how things are landing on the ground there in Malaysia, that we can build the picture towards the spirit and make that connection between heaven and earth together.
我们站在不同的土地
People's
上，
learning
我
in
们用
this
着
field of
自己的
anthroposophy,
感知力
where
去
we
与
always
灵界世
start
界
with the
连接。
biggest picture, the widest image, sort of developing what we might call far-sightedness, a real capacity to see into the future and to broaden our gaze to the widest horizon.
我们将我们的
Cultivate
视野
open-mindedness. And so I will try to
扩大。我希望在这个过程中，我们
I
能
will try to
够
be an
用
example
一
of
个更宽广的
those
视野
practices when I
去
arrive
理解
there
事
and
物。
I meet the bees there for the first time, Apis cerana or Apis florea or Apis dorsata, some of which I've met before in a small way, but and the stingless bees, we also have stingless bees in Central and South America who I have met before. But meeting something is different than really coming to know and understand and have experience with something. So today I'd like to share with you just a few images of how we've come to approach, how we've come to apply, rather, the approach of biodynamic beekeeping here on our land, what we look for, what sort of support we can give to the bees, as well as sort of a general and deeper understanding of who is this creature. And just, I have only so much time to give a few pictures today, but I hope it will whet the appetite. It will get us kind of excited to continue this exploration together when we're also there in person. So I'm going to pull up my screen to share with you some pictures. So, and I'm sharing pictures from our honeybee sanctuary first. And this is actually the building here is where I'm currently.
农场
My office is on the right-hand side. We call this building the bee barn. And you walk out of the door and we're surrounded by this landscape that we have devoted our attention and effort in service of the bees. And the first thing that we find when we turn our attention towards the bees is that the bee is a creature that is completely social. And the social aspect of the honeybee doesn't only live within the confines of the hive or the nest, but their relationship, the relationship of the honeybee to its greater wholeness is actually manifest in the relationship to the flower, in the relationship to the plants. So if the plant world is not healthy, if there is not a good amount of nectar and pollen in the world around the beehive, then the beehive itself cannot be healthy. And on the other side, if the world of the plants, if there are no bees coming to visit, the plant world also cannot be healthy. So we have this beautiful mutuality of the bee and the plant really living together in harmony. And it's such an important work, actually, to support the bee by planting flowers. people sometimes ask me, the bees are in trouble. There's so much, pesticides and loss of habitat, and there's different, mites and diseases and viruses and things affecting the bees. What can we really do? And I think the first thing that everyone can do, no matter if you're in a city or in the suburbs or in the country, everybody can plant flowers for the bees. This is one of the most important things that we can do to help transform the world around us, is to fill it with flowers to the best of our ability, even if it's a pot, a planter pot in our backyard or on the porch, or yeah, even in urban areas, we can really lift up the world of the plants too. So here at the sanctuary, we try to find different plants that are coming into bloom throughout the whole season. So for us, we live in a 4-season climate. So we have spring, summer, winter, and fall, kind of like 4 distinct seasons. And each one brings forth a different expression and a different types of plants. So every time of the year that you would come here, you might meet something a little bit different in the landscape, and the bees also meet something a little bit different in the landscape. Each one of these flowers that we choose to plant has many different qualities to it. And some things, this is clover. This one is called crimson clover. And it comes into bloom very early for us in the spring. And the bees can really utilize this to make honey. The thing about growing flowers for the bees is that when you're growing things in a huge quantity, like in this picture we have at the front a plant called buckwheat, and in the back a plant called yellow mustard. And when a honeybee leaves the hive and flies out into the flowers and starts to pollinate, it is completely loyal to one type of flower. So it won't go to the buckwheat and then to the mustards and then back to the buckwheat again. It will only go to one flower, fill up as much as it can, then go back home, then unload what it has gathered, and then it can go to a different type of flower on its next flight, on its next trip. So one important thing is to make sure that we're not just planting one flower of one type here next to another different type of flower. If we have a small space, the best thing we can do is plant a few of the same type of flower, so that when the bee arrives at that one point, they can really gather from that one type of flower, because they will be loyal to that in their flight. And in addition to providing kind of a large swath or a large quantity of the same type of flowers,
我们花朵，我们
also recognize that it's not only about quantity,
同类的花，我
it's
们
not
种
only
的
about
比较大量，在同一个
but
地
it's
方。
also about the medicinal value, the nutritional value of these flowers. So this asks us, what is the soil that the plant is grown in? How healthy and vibrant is that landscape around the flower? How is that flower being nourished? And then also, what plants can we cultivate that are a medicinal value for the honeybees?
我们尝试
There's a really big overlap
呃
between the
有
plants
疗愈
that are
性的花
medicinal
卉，
for human beings and the plants that are medicinal for the honeybee.
医疗效
I
用
think you can
对
loves
于
this,
人
he can
类，像
observe
这个
this.
鼠尾草
Anybody who is growing plant medicine and is watching their
是
plants go into the
蜜蜂
flowering
的
stage,
良药，也
look
是我们
particularly at the plants that the honeybees go to visit, because that
我
the
们
medicinal value of that plant that maybe you would harvest and turn into medicine or make into a tea or a tincture or something like this, the bee is able to take that in and bring it to the hive that serves the hive also as medicine. And if we might also go to the beehive and harvest a little bit of honey, we will also receive that wonderful medicine that the honeybees gather and create. So when we're looking at the different types of plants, and maybe it's not that important for me to name each flower here for you, because maybe the flowers that you're used to are a little bit different. But what I do want to say is that the way that we sort of develop this understanding of what the bees need is by watching, by observing, by having this great experience of, this is a poppy, oriental poppy, and you can see how many bees are there, just all buzzing all over it. It is a beautiful thing to witness the bees gathering their medicine. And even if they're just getting little bits, we're really trying to see that the honey is full of little bits of a huge diversity, so that we have many different micronutrients. We have many different nutritional aspects that are coming together into this honey, because the honey is the most important food for the bees. Yeah, bees are not meant to eat sugar, to eat the cane sugar. The bees are really meant to transform nectar from many different types of plants into this fermented substance we call honey. And yeah, it's not so much that the bees would not be healthy if we only gave them one thing. There was only one kind of flower. So the diversity is really important for the bees. So a lot of these flowers I'm showing you, like this is called lavender, and this is called echinacea or purple cone flower. This is one that is native to our region, of a wonderful medicinal plant. And then we also recognize that when we're supporting the landscape, that it is flourishing with many different types of nectar and pollen, that it's not only about one species of bee, just as it's not just about one species of flower. So the diversity of the insect life is also really important for the health of the landscape. If we look at the landscape really as a living and breathing organism, as we do in the field of biodynamic agriculture, where we see that the diversity of many different species cohabitating and living together actually brings health for all of them. And if you only have one kind of bee, again, we're at a place where it's not so healthy, that the plant world can't really thrive with just one type. It also needs a great diversity of insects. So this creature, this little bee, is called a metallic sweat bee. Where we are in Virginia, we have 72 species of bees that are indigenous to this area, of native bees. 72 species of native bees. And the Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, is one that is actually not native here. So this is also especially important to recognize when we are working with something that is not from here. It will have an impact on all the beings that are from here. And we really want to see how do we build a balance between the native bees and the domesticated bees, the ones that are more closely connected to maybe a farm or a small garden holding where we're keeping bees there so that maybe we are able to harvest a little bit of the honey as medicine, something like that. But it's true that you can also go too far with the bees, with the honeybees, and have too many honeybees than what the landscape can support. And in certain areas, having too many honeybees mean that the native bees tend to be the ones that have the most trouble. And the diversity of native bees that are going extinct and that we're losing at this time is something that we're really aware of. That we're not only creating a sanctuary for the honeybees, but we're actually creating a sanctuary for all of the pollinators. That all of these different creatures, all of the different types of bees, but also the butterfly. Yeah, so this is called a monarch butterfly. And the monarch butterfly is a very special creature who only can lay her eggs on this one particular plant. It's called a milkweed plant. And this is true for many native species that they have formed over thousands and thousands of years particular relationships to certain plants. So we call the plant the host species of the monarch butterfly. So in this relationship, the milkweed is the host for the monarch. And if you do not have any milkweed on your land, you will not have any monarchs either. And that kind of developing a knowledge and an understanding of the particular needs of the native pollinators also helps us to provide a sanctuary for them as well. If we do not understand their needs, we cannot really serve them. We might do it accidentally, which is good, but really learning how to serve them comes with developing our knowledge, developing our understanding of the particular needs of each species, and then kind of helping to host them on our landscape by planting those host flowers. So I'm just going to go through here a few other species of diversity. And on the one hand, you know, it's helpful to know the name of something, because then you can begin to pay attention maybe in a new way, or you can greet it like you would greet a friend or an acquaintance, somebody that maybe you just met. You can say, oh, hi, you're a fiery skipper. A skipper is a beautiful type of moth. That's called a fiery skipper. But what do we really see? Are we satisfied by only knowing the name? Or how do we really come to explore how this creature's life expresses itself on our landscape? How does the skipper interact with the honeybee, for example? Are the health of these different pollinators intertwined? When we think about the flower, we have like a chalice. It's a beautiful cup there called a nectary, where the pollinators go to gather their nectar. And it's if they're passing the cup from one pollinator to the other. First, the honeybee comes to the cup and puts her proboscis in and drinks. Then the cup fills up again. And maybe the skipper comes and puts her tongue into the same cup. So we see that the sharing of these cups, if I can put it that way, the sharing of the flowers and the nectar the sharing of this environment means that all of these beings are coming into very intimate contact with each other. So you could see that the health of the bacterial culture and the fungal culture and the yeast culture that is part of the development of each one of these creatures is sort of like a connective tissue that intertwines them all, that goes into their gut, that goes into their stomach, and so on. And when you have honeybees at a particular piece of land, you have this wonderful relationship to something called lactobacteria. This is the same bacteria that is used to create kimchi or sauerkraut or yogurt. Lactobacteria is what's in the stomach of the honeybee in a very high amount because of its capacity to transform that into honey. And so when the honeybee is there on the landscape, there is a much greater proliferation of this healthy bacteria that actually helps to keep the digestive system of the native bees healthy too. So there is a beautiful overlap here between and a real connection between the health of the native bees and the health of the honeybees that we can support. Yeah, I'm very excited to see the diversity of pollinators in your lands where you all are living, but also just to encourage you to experience it yourself. This is another kind of moth called a hummingbird moth, going to the bee balm, and a swallowtail butterfly there with the bee balm as well. And here we see 3 different insects coming to the same flower. The flower is called goldenrod, which is something that blooms for us in the fall. And on the left-hand side is the honeybee. And in the middle is a creature called the bald-faced hornet. And then on the right is a sweat bee. And all sharing from the same bounty. So there is not necessarily a competition. There is really only a competition when there is a scarcity. When there's not enough nectar and pollen, then you start to see different behaviors emerge because there's not enough food. I think maybe we all get a little grumpy when there's not enough food. So that's very natural. But in general, we see, especially here at the sanctuary, that all of the diversity of these different creatures, that they are coexisting in a great harmony that we want to support. So maybe more than half of our work, maybe 75% of our work as beekeepers is actually in caring for the land. For us, that's really a big part of what it means to be a sanctuary, is that we're developing the landscape to be a host for this great symphony of diversity. And then the question comes, once we've developed the landscape, once we've created this beautiful garden, this beautiful environment for the bees to thrive, then how do we actually attend to their needs as a hive? And maybe the biggest question that we bring in our beekeeping is a question actually to ourselves. When do we step in and exert our will? When do we exert or apply what we know to try to help the bees? And when do we take a step back and let the bees do what they know how to do the best? This is sort of a central question for our beekeeping methods, for deciding what to do. How can we actually improve the bees' lives? How can we support their needs? How can we step in a way that is truly helpful? This is the other aspect of sanctuary, is actually developing a sanctuary within ourselves as human beings. How do we create a sanctuary within our hearts where we truly have space for the other to live? Where we understand their needs well enough that we can develop the capacities that we need to serve those needs. How do we develop the right capacities to serve the needs of the bees? And when do we honor their wisdom by just taking a step back and saying, you know what to do? So this kind of flips things on its head a little bit from what a lot of people are in the field of beekeeping for. A lot of human beings approach the bees in the world today and say, how can I get something? How can I get as much as possible from you? How can I get as much honey? How can I get as much wax? And a lot of the beekeeping practices, especially in the last 100 years, have been developed and geared towards the goal of getting as much as possible from the bees. And the practices that have developed right alongside and parallel to those conventional methods of trying to get as much as possible is this stream of biodynamic beekeeping, where we've actually been asking the bees, what do you need? Who are you, really? How do we deepen our understanding, not just of the physical, but also the spiritual aspects? How do we develop the human soul that we really come into a true partnership with this being? And it's not even about, it's not that we don't harvest honey or wax. It's really that we ask, when does the bee have extra honey that it doesn't need? When can we actually receive honey as a gift rather than taking something that the bees need? When can we receive something that they actually have that's extra? A true surplus. And why would we take something if the bees didn't have extra to give? Where in taking, we would actually be doing a disservice to their future. Yeah. In the last 100 years in the conventional beekeeping world, we have been taking and taking so much that we actually have harmed the possibility for the honeybees to have a future on Earth. And the crisis that we're currently in is actually this crisis of taking too much. Taking too much from the bees, as beekeepers especially. So this is something that we can really do. If we see that the bees, the population of bees is dwindling, that bees are dying every year, that there's a lot of different disease and pests and things that the bees are faced with in the world that are challenges. How can we help the bees to meet those challenges? How can we create and engender resilience in the bees to meet those challenges? That those challenges might actually make them stronger rather than weaker and weaker and weaker. That they don't rely on antibiotics or different chemicals and things like that being applied all the time, but that they develop their own vigor and vitality, that they develop their health and well-being in such a way that they're really able to meet what comes towards them from the world. Yeah. This is kind of our big question, and what we're exploring at the Honeybee Sanctuary is and it's a mutual development between our own consciousness and the way that we approach these creatures, and allowing them really to grow up and thrive and to be healthy and vital. And part of it simply includes lifting the bees up in reverence. The honeybees and all the pollinators, but especially those honeybees and their social lives and what they've developed also in relationship to the human being, is something that has been revered, that has been kind of the holy of holies in the center of the temple, in the monastery. Yeah. The honeybees were at the center of spiritual life and were greatly revered for thousands of years, thousands and thousands of years. And it's only really in the recent history where we've sort of brought them from that exalted place, where we really revered them and approached them in this reverence. We've really brought them and tried to turn them into a honey creating machine, rather than allowing them to really express their lives and continue to evolve. We've actually halted their evolution with our materialistic strivings to get as much as possible from them. So in our workshops and in our gatherings, and for people that come to work along with us and learn along with us and learn with the bees, we so often have created ceremony to really honor the spiritual aspect of the bee in connection and in relationship to the physical aspect of the bee. And the spiritual aspect of the bee has everything to do with service, has everything to do with having the capacities to be able to serve the other. The honeybee is always devoted towards the whole, towards the needs of the whole. Everything she does is in service of this greater whole and this greater organism. And you can say that she has developed what might be called a life based in love. And in the Bee Lectures by Rudolf Steiner in 1923, he says this, he says, what we experience within ourselves only at a time when our hearts develop love is actually the same thing that is present as a substance in the entire beehive. That the whole beehive is permeated with life based in love. So this is a meditation, something really to work with, something that can develop our spiritual connection to the bees, and something that when we take into ourselves helps us to develop actually the attitude and the approach that allows the bees to feel safe in human presence again, and to trust in the human relationship again, to build a bond between us and the bee. This is a step that actually we need to do to help correct the mistakes that modern beekeeping has brought towards the bee, and that modern land care and agriculture and so forth has brought as challenges to the bee. Those are all challenges that are created by us and need to be worked on by us in order to bring the healing that is needed for us to thrive together. So I'll share with you this invocation here that we've been working with. I'd love to bring this and continue working with it together with you all in June. As a worldwide community, we gather to learn together in the spirit of warm-hearted devotion, that through a deepening and ripening understanding, we may find the right ways to serve the bees, and through the inspiring life that they lead, receive spiritual nourishment for flourishing human hearts, beating and working together for the good of the whole, to manifest on earth human life based in love. So in this way, we want to allow the honeybees to be our great teachers. We want to invite them into our lives in a very special way. See how we can really, truly work to support them. And I think too, in exploring the diversity of the bees, in exploring the subtle differences in how these different types of bees express their life. We can also see the subtleties and diversity of how each one of us expresses our love. What is each one of our languages of love? How do we work in service of the whole? Yeah? How does the stingless bee do this? How does Apis florea do this? Or Apis cerana? So these pictures were shared with me by Chikying, and yeah, it's just very touching and beautiful to see how these incredible insects express their lives in different places and as different species. And the beekeeping practices that we've developed here in Virginia are really supportive for Apis mellifera and supportive, and really they've grounded themselves here where we have 4 seasons and so on. But in an equatorial region like Malaysia, where there is no winter, for example, there's no this like dark, cold period snow. The bees are completely inside. You know, these bees are outside. You can see them freely hanging from a tree branch. Yeah. The warmth, the atmosphere, the relationship to the sun, and the rhythms of rain, for example, of the hot and dry versus rain, or maybe just kind of wet at these, especially during the monsoons, during these different times of the year, where there's a lot more wet, where the nectar itself becomes a little more washed out, where in the wet, the bees cannot fly. If it's wet, they stay in their nice little cluster. They orient their bodies so that the water kind of pelts off their wings. But in my terminology, that's like the winter, is this monsoon season. It's the whatever period of time where we don't have many flowers, where there's not a real ability for the bees to go out and gather a lot of nectar and transform that into honey, and then transform that again into wax. Then they stay nice and huddled up and eating their honey during that period of time until there's more flowers again. And it's not so wet and they can fly. And then they can build their comb once more. And they can create new queens and swarm. And they can migrate and spread out into the environment. Yeah, really kind of following the bees is also following these patterns in the weather and in the seasons, just like all of agriculture. It plugs us in and connects us right into those rhythms of the season, that relationship between the earth and the sun. And what happens during those wet periods that's different than what happens during those dry periods? When is the nectar really flowing? Yeah. And when are the bees kind of held back and they have to just rely on the nectar that they've already gathered? So these are all questions that I bring towards Malaysian beekeeping, and would love to continue to explore with you all. And I think I'll stop my sharing of the screen right now. I went a little bit more time than I had hoped, but we do have, if it works for you all, I'm happy to stay for at least another 15 minutes or so to have a little discussion and any questions or any more sharing that anyone would request of me. So thank you.
Yeah, Chee, welcome you back to the main hall.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alex. Can we first check if there's any question from the chat? If not, anyone would like to raise your hand? And any question? Welcome. Is there any question from the floor? Right. Okay, so while we're waiting for any question, maybe Alex, would you be able to share a little more about what might happen during the workshop, for the 3 days workshop? Yeah, just some brief sharing to the interested participants.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to seeing how we might actually have some experiences directly with the bees. So maybe I'll rely on your local knowledge and any connections that we might be able to make while we're there to actually go out and experience and be really with the bee. But the first piece that I'd love to bring is kind of exploring a depth of understanding. There's actually a lot in the natural scientific research of the anatomy and the physiology of the bee, that when we deeply understand how the organism works, how the organism and what mysteries are there in the development of the body of the individual bee, then actually we find some really key points that help us to gain a deeper understanding of how to support their bodily needs, their earthly needs. What is really this creation of wax? How do they do it? Is it important for them? Yeah, it's like it's part of their metabolism is the creation of the wax. And the importance of things like pollen. How does the pollen evolve and get transformed? The pollen is something that the bees gather, but they don't just use the raw pollen. They actually mix it with water and nectar, and they ferment the pollen and create something called bee bread. And that bee bread is what the nurse bees eat, and it stimulates these big glands that they have in their head. And through those big glands in their head being fed by the bee bread, they exude this substance that's called royal jelly. Some of you might have heard of royal jelly or larval jelly, and that substance goes to feed every single larva, and it goes to feed the queen, that she's able to continually produce eggs from this stream of pollen. And that brings us, again, it like each one of these pathways where we're following the pollen, for example, from the plant all the way down to the egg, where we find the pollen right there in the yolk. Every single egg that the queen lays has this rich, nutritious yolk that comes through from the stream of pollen. And so the quality and the diversity and the health of that plant is directly related then to the development of this egg hatching into a larva, transforming into a pupa, and becoming a healthy adult bee. So kind of there's all these wonderful little threads through understanding the anatomy more deeply that can help us to bring a bigger picture into the practices, the actual beekeeping practices. And if I can just share one more slide here, because a big piece of the work and what we'll be doing together while I'm there is sort of going through what have become sort of like the key pillars in the last 100 years of developing this relationship with the bees and this type of beekeeping. We've really developed these kind of pillars for what helps to keep the bees healthy and vital. And a lot of these elements are very much born out of the wisdom of the bees and the fullest expression of their natural instincts. But so much of the beekeeping practices in the conventional world, where the goal is to get as much honey and comb and so on, have really worked against those basic instincts, that really basic kind of, this is what the bees need to be healthy. So all of our beekeeping practices that we'll share, what kind of form, what kind of hive do we put the bees into? And do we provide any comb or let the bees make their own natural wax comb? And let the bees make their own queens? And let the bees swarm? And find out, in our climate, in our region, is there a good time of year to harvest honey? Is there an appropriate time of year where the bees have then made it through maybe the rainy season with what they needed, and we're just about to receive a big flow of nectar from the environment based on our knowledge of what's going to be coming into bloom soon? Then maybe we find this key moment where harvesting honey is actually appropriate, and when there's really a true surplus that the bees don't need. Yeah, and then especially this look towards healing and treatments. So I understand that the mites and disease and pressure, this is something that beekeepers say you cannot work with bees without treating them for mites, for example. And this is something that we have many different approaches to in biodynamic beekeeping, where we've actually found really successful ways of working with these pests that other beekeepers are kind of confounded by. Where other beekeepers say you cannot keep bees without treating for mites. And that's the same here in the United States. You go to any regular beekeeping club and you hear that if you do not use miticides, if you do not actually put pesticides to kill the mites inside your beehive, then your hives can never survive. And we have found through the biodynamic ashing methods, through the use of formic acid and we have a bee tea. You can make a tea for the bees that can really, you can feed that to them, and by drinking through that tea. So there's all these wonderful healings and treatments and approaches, more like a holistic picture of how do we support the bees, that have allowed us to become completely separated from having to use any kind of chemicals within our beehives or any antibiotics or anything like that. But there's a knowledge there that's really important, and it fits into really this wider picture of the whole approach, really allowing and supporting this wisdom of the bee, that their health and well-being can shine through. So through those, the exploration of those principles, the practices, how to manage the hives, how to understand what they need, how to kind of develop this more intimate way of knowing the bee, will also kind of take our steps towards beekeeping practices. And I think that's where things get really interesting, is bringing these kind of bigger picture principles right down to the ground. And that's what we really want to be able to do for you over the 3 days there in Kuala Lumpur, is to really see how can we bring this down to earth, down to the ground, so that you can apply it right there with the bees that are in your life.
Alex. Yep. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, there's perhaps we take one last question. There's one from the chat here. Can you share what are the extrinsic values to might help motivate conventional beekeepers to approach the biodynamic methods?
Yeah, beautiful. So one of the things that I feel so grateful for, I have been here at the Honeybee Sanctuary in Virginia for the last 11 years. This honeybee sanctuary is 15 years old. And we have a lot of research over that time of how the bees are doing. And when you look at the world around, you see, like in the United States, in this last year, I don't know exactly how this is measured in Malaysia. That would be very interesting. But colony losses, hive losses, is an average 55% Apis mellifera have been lost from April of 2023 to April of 2024, which is how we measure that here. And for us, we had 95% of our bees survive. We lost we lost 2 hives in the winter, which is very normal. So when you find that your bees are surviving, it is also less input. It's less economic input. The losses of bees is actually something that's putting many beekeepers out of business. And not only are they losing bees and they have to buy more and replace them, but there's much higher inputs because they're constantly feeding the bees sugar. They're constantly using antibiotics and chemicals in the beehive. And it actually is a lot more labor intensive when they're trying to prevent things like swarming and so on. The amount of effort and activity that goes into caring for bees in the conventional method, it's actually way less efficient in terms of our time. And so both in the survivability of the bees, in leaning into the bees in their own health and kind of supporting their health, and when the bees are healthy, it turns out that they're also productive. It turns out that we do have a capacity to harvest honey on good years and wax and so on. And with so few losses of hives, this longevity, over the long period, it's much more sustainable picture over the long period. But that's one thing that is a mindset that is hard to change, I think, is a short-term, short gain, trying to get something really quick and in this year and so on, versus really looking at the long-term picture. Yeah. The idea of healthy hives in a more conventional methodology always thinks that bigger is better. And when you really look at the health of an organism, the biggest aren't always the best. Especially with the bees, we find it's actually the middle of the road, the ones that are just kind of steady, don't grow too big, aren't too small, but kind of right in the middle is where we find the hives that last the longest. Yeah, we have hives here that are 10 years old, persist year after year after year, very healthy, very strong. And that's the kind of thing that we find attracts the most people to the biodynamic method, is that, first of all, it really works because the bees are healthy and surviving. And it's something that our own heart, our own kind of human sensibility, our feeling of compassion for the other is supported by these methods as well. That we don't have to sacrifice our values in order to keep these bees, but really we can enhance and deepen our sense of love and compassion and consciousness in relationship to the bees. So for some people, they're also attracted to this because the bees are an incredible teacher. And for anybody sort of curious and striving towards a deeper relationship to the spiritual world, the bees are one of the greatest teachers that can lead us from our life here on earth to the spirit. So I think there's many aspects to the beekeeping, from the really down to earth, very practical, this works, our bees are surviving actually, and they don't need to be replaced every year, all the way to the heights, you could say, where we restore the bees to a place of reverence and really see that our life and the long-term relationship is essential for our life here on earth as humans at all. We're not going to make it without the bees. We have to go together.
Thank you, Alex. So it's 9:45. But can we take one more question? The question is the course on Apis mellifera.
Is your course on Apis mellifera? I would say no. I think it's more general Apis, a more general bee picture. I'll have more specific examples from my own work with Apis mellifera, but it's not necessary that we focus only there. I think, yeah, the questions that you bring, and also if maybe we can keep, if we have some requests, like if any one of you is particularly interested in working with one type of bee, if you want to work with Serrana, for example, or the stingless bee, or dorsata, or so on, then maybe share that with Chikying or one of us, that we make sure we include it and have that exploration together.
Yeah, as Alex shared at the beginning, we will have hands-on work in the garden with bees during the workshop. So yeah. And Yuao, what about, are you here? Would you like to turn on your mic, and then we give the very last question, sums up all your questions into one that you would like to must raise now? Would you like to straight to dialogue with Alex? Yuao?
Hello.
Yeah.
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 Thank you. Good night, Alex. Hello, I'm Yorel from Indonesia. I would like to ask, I have a problem. Actually, I have a experience with my hive. That's my hive problem is, does we need, sorry, I'm late because the time differences with Indonesia, I late 1 hour. Does we need to clean the beehive? My hive has problem with cockroach and lizards, many lizards in my garden. Thank you.
So the problem is with many lizards and cockroaches within the hive. Did I understand that correctly? And do
Yes.
you need to clean the hive?
Yeah. Yeah. We need regular cleaning, like some brushing or cleaning the debris, something like that. And how to keep the hive warm? Does the hive need direct? Can the hive exposed to direct sunlight or direct rainfall? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so the direct sunlight and is okay. I think it's not necessary 100% to have direct sunlight. They're okay in the shade too. I would suggest looking at sort of the size of the hive and seeing that maybe it's too big. Usually when you find lizards or cockroaches or different pests or so on that are coming in to an active hive, it means that they're not really able to protect themselves well. So one of the things to do is to make the entrance of the hive a little smaller so that the bees can more easily guard that entrance. Yeah, and then the other thing to do is to actually shrink the size of the box or the size of the hive. Maybe it's too big. And if there's empty space within that cavity, it also becomes places where different creatures will come and live and make disturbances for the hive. But if you can actually keep them kind of nice and tight, then they feel big and strong and they can actually expand into that whole space. And much fewer problems occur when the bees are nice and kind of tight in their spot. And if they're in a cavity that has way too much empty space, that's when you tend to have the most issues inside. And then if the hive is dead, and you're wondering how to clean it, yeah, I think if there's a lot of debris, I would do what you said, like brush the debris out. And also you can put the woodenware to the sun and just let the sun really work on it. Yeah, that helps to get it ready for the next bees.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Yoel. Yeah, I think it's time. And we are very looking forward for your real experience with us at the event during the conference. I remember when I was at SparkNut for the very first time, I was touched almost immediately when I see and experience how Alex communicate with the bees. Yeah, he greeted them every morning and then listen to the bugs and feel and sense how's the bees is doing on every day. And that many more. I just can't wait to welcome Alex. And I'm sure anyone who experienced the bees with Alex will fall in love immediately with bees. So yeah. And Samantha will help to post a relevant conference information link on the chat here. And I think we can thank you, Alex, one more time for today, for the wonderful time and sharing with us. And look forward to welcome you in June.
You're so welcome, and thank you all so much. And yeah, I am so excited to be there with you. So thank you for sharing this time together with me.
Thank you. I think we can turn off our mic and then say goodbye to Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you this June.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks,
See you
Alex.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for joining this sharing session. We look